Today's daf, we're going to be learning Sanhedrin Mem Gimel, a very, very famous daf for various reasons. It's got a lot of interesting topics. In fact, almost all of the extra content for this week was all on today's daf on various topics because it's a super interesting daf, and particularly interesting because there's a whole section that's taken out because of the censor from the 1200s, the 13th century, when the Christians when they did burn sections of the Gemara. It's a lot to be said about it. You can read up in Shuli Mishkin's flashback about the historical piece of it, and you can read up. There's lots written about it. Anyway, that's a bit of what's going to be today. Depending on what Gemara you're using, you may not have a whole section because it was taken out. And like in my Gemara, for example, it does not appear. Happens to be at the very bottom of a page. I wonder if the printer did it intentionally, and there's just a big blank space at the bottom. My Gemara actually, in most Gemaras, there's a big blank space. Mine has a small blank space. It's not even organized that much. In other Gemaras, it's kind of obvious that something's been removed. And in other texts, it's put back in. For example, the Sefaria, which is based on the Koran, has it back in. In general, the Koran is pretty consistent that wherever there's censorship and words are changed and all sorts of things, they change it back to the original. Whereas many of the traditional Gemaras don't do that. They kind of leave it as is. Okay. Anyway, with that, we'll get started. Today's daf is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in honor of her grandson, Oriana Hartman's marriage to Shiur Shachar Katsav. May they live long lives together, inspired by Torah and love. Mazal tov. Today's daf is sponsored by Marcia Baum in loving memory of Helena K. Baum, Chaya Chana Alta, Bat Chana B'Yekuti El Yehud on her 9th yahrzeit. Mom was a strong proponent of women's Torah study long before it became mainstream. She studied at the Drisha Institute with women half her age. She's missed every day by those who loved her, and we hope we are making her proud. And today's daf is sponsored in memory of Shena Malka Bat Shlomo Yosef on her yahrzeit. Okay, with that, let's go. So we're in the middle of a sugya. We talked about how do we know that when they took the person who was stoned out to be killed, that they would take them out, that the Beit HaSkilah was 3 machanot, basically a certain distance away from the court or outside the city. So we have one source, which was Gezerah Shava. We're going to learn it from the Parim and Nisrafim. There it says outside the camp, and here it says outside the camp. And then we had a whole long drasha. How do we learn it there? And then from the Gezerah Shava, we can learn back to here. Second, we have Rav Papa, who said, what do you mean? Why learn it from Gezerah Shava? Learn it from the Psukim themselves about the person who cursed God and got stoned. And there it said, number one, God said, take him out of the camp. And Moshe was where? In Machaneh Leviah. He wasn't in the middle, in the inner camp. He was already outside one of the camps. And then it says, take him out one camp. That gets you to Machaneh Yisrael. Then when they actually take him out, it again says, El Michutz LaMachaneh. They take him out outside the camp. That already gets us out to Machaneh Yisrael. We raise the issue, what about the Braita? How could Rav Papa ignore Braita? We'll get back to that. Now the Gemara says, wait a minute. That second pasuk you used to prove it is the pasuk about when they actually did it. The pasuk needs to tell you that they actually did what God told them. So it's not unnecessary, therefore not open for darshaning. So the Gemara is right. That was asiyah behet asiyah. To which they answer, no, asiyah behet yaktiva. It already says. Okay, I'm going to read you the whole pasuk so you follow, and we're going to darshan different parts of it soon. Vayikra chapter 24, verse 23. Vayidaber Moshe el bnei Israel. So Moshe, after God told him, this is what you should do, Moshe then tells bnei Israel, and in fact, vayotziu et hamakalel michutz lamachaneh, and then they take him out. Vayirgemu oto aven, they stone him, and ubnei Israel asu kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Well, then it has a totally unnecessary part. It says, and the Jews did exactly what God said. So if the Jews did exactly what God said, you didn't need to tell us that they took him outside the camp, and you didn't need to tell us that he stoned him, because it already says that in the pasuk. Again, I'll read the first pasuk. And I want you to notice there's one thing that doesn't repeat here, and we're going to come back to that. That's why I'm reading this. In Vayikra, 10 pasukim before, Yudalid, or 9 pasukim before, in pasuk Yudalid, it says, Hotseat mekalel michutz lamachaneh. This is what God tells Moshe. Take him outside the camp. Samchu kol hashomim et yidehem al rosho. All those who were involved in hearing what he said, right, he cursed God, put their hands on his head. And then the whole community stones him. Okay, this is something, by the way, in Daf Mishalahem, they focused on this week about this idea that in the Torah, all the people are supposed to be involved in the stoning. And in the Mishnah, you see that's not the case, right? Who stones him? We're going to see the court does it really, and it's not so much the people. There seems to be a trying to remove the people, that it's dangerous to have all the people do this instead of, it becomes the court representatives. And it's another switch that we see from the Torah to the later, with the rabbis already interpreted things just like, right? We talked about all over the Torah, kill this person, kill this person, kill this person, and they try so hard not to kill in the Gemara, right? In the Mishnah. The Mishnah has this agenda, and the Gemara continues that agenda of not really wanting to have capital punishment. So now we have an unnecessary pasuk, and that's why we can darshan it, because we already know. If you want to know that the Jews did what God said, it says so. The Jews did what God said. You don't need to repeat all the actions they did. So now they say, okay, wait. So now we understand. When it says they took him out of the machaneh, that came to teach us the third camp. But well, then you have to explain why it also said in the pasuk that they stoned him. Well, that's needed for the following drasha. Okay, first we darshan oto. Oto means him and not with his clothing on. That means they would strip them naked before they would stone them. And that's because oto, he has to be stoned directly without any sort of anything in between. Even, when we think about stoning, you imagine people pelting with stones. No, if you use even one stone, you've done it properly. Okay, now they want to point out that in a different pasuk, I think it's when they talk about the Mikoshesh Eitzim, who also got stoned. I forgot, but I think it's from there. It says avanim. So now they want to know why there it says stones in plural and here it says stone in singular. It's avanim. We're now on a total tangent, although obviously it has to do with stoning, which is what we're talking about. To eat, because we're on a tangent because we're trying to figure out how we got to this michutz lamachaneh. You might have thought, if it says Yergemoto Aven, maybe it means you use one stone, and if for some reason the person doesn't die with that one stone, you don't have to bring any more. That you fulfilled the killing, even though you haven't killed the person. It'd be strange for you to think that, but maybe because it's Aven, maybe they think it's only supposed to be done with one stone. Therefore, Katarachman Avanim. That's why it's said in plural. So now we have to say, why don't you just say Avanim? Well, Ikatarachman Avanim, Havamina Ikarnete Tarte. You would have thought maybe at the start you have to bring two. Katarachman Aven to explain, no, you really could only use one. Just if it doesn't work, you can add more. Okay, now back to our topic. And I said we were going to get back to this. Rav Papa seems to disagree with the Braita. The Braita said we learn it from Gzera Shava of Parim and Israfim, to our case. And Rav Papa said we learn it from the Psukim themselves in our case. But didn't the Braita already say, and here's our question, why is Rav Papa bringing a different proof when the Braita already said Ne'emar? Now, Ne'emar is where they're quoting a word from the Braita, which said, Ne'emar al michutz lamachaneh. It said michutz lamachaneh there, and it says michutz lamachaneh here, and we're going to do Gzera Shava. So Ne'emar is just a way of saying Gzera Shava of the Braita. So why is Rav Papa offering some other explanation? Well, ilu lo ne'emar kamar. What they really mean to say is, if you didn't have it said, that's what they meant. Okay, that doesn't really make much sense. Let's explain. The Gemara is going to explain. V'hachi kamar. This is what the Braita is saying. Ilu lo ne'emar kra, if it didn't have a pasuk by the Mekalel itself, meaning, oh yeah, of course we knew Rav Papa's proof, okay? We also read the psukim the way Rav Papa read them, obviously before Rav Papa. But if we didn't have those psukim, and we couldn't darshan them that way, hayiti omer gzera shava. Then I could bring a gzera shava. But now that we have psukim, gzera shava lo tzarich. We don't really need this gzera shava. That's a very strange way of understanding the Braita. But in order to resolve Rav Papa, they basically reread the Braita to say we have a gzera shava in the event that we didn't have a pasuk to prove it directly. But we have a pasuk to prove it directly. We don't really need this gzera shava. Okay, there's a bunch of things that have been said on this because it's a little bit confusing, but we're going to move on because there's so much in our daf that we want to delve into. So we'll just accept it right now that it's, again, this is usually, it's not, is a difficult question that the Gemara is asking. And I'm happy the Gemara asked it because it looks very strange, right? It doesn't fit our general rules. And Amora doesn't usually come up with a drasha if the Tanaim already had a good drasha. But what it's really highlighting is that his drasha is really better than the Braita. And therefore it's saying the Braita must have known that and is bringing the Zerushav as an extra. Moving on. Rav Ashi Amar. Told you we get to Rav Ashi. He has a third interpretation. He's going to learn the whole thing from the Mikalel also, from the one who cursed God, the blasphemer. But he's going to learn it not from two psukim the way we did in the action and in the commandment and in the action, but he's going to learn it all from the commandment of God. Moshe hechana v'yativ. Okay, we're starting again with the same thing. Where was Moshe? B'machane Leviyah. He was already outside of one camp. V'amar le'rachmana hotzei et ha'mekalel. Now here we're cutting the pasuk first. Take out the mekalel. Just in the word take out, that already means take out of the camp. Chutz l'machane Leviyah. When it says to outside the camp, that already means another camp. Chutz l'machane Israel. So take out is already one. Two, right? The continuation of that verse, outside the camp is two. V'yotziu et ha'mekalel. And what does he do with that other pasuk? Right? There aren't four camps. When it says they took out the mekalel, he says, oh, that's lasiyah. That's to tell us that they actually did what God said. Now we're going to have the obvious problem, which is, didn't we say you don't need that pasuk because it already says they did like what Moshe said, what God said? Asiyah behedek ktivu v'nei Yisrael asu kasher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Right? The Jews already, it says the Jews did exactly what God commanded. So they say, no, that is needed for something else. And now I'm going to go back to something I told you to pay attention to before, which is we have three commandments that God says. Take him out of the camp, put your hands on his head, and stone him. And in the actions, it says they took him out of the camp, they stoned him, and it doesn't say they put the hands on the head. So what's the part that says, and they did just like God commanded? Both for smicha, and they add this dichiyah, which is the way you kill someone, is first they would push him out of a house, out of a structure, and then they would stone. So this is to tell you they did the hand thing and the smicha, and they did the dichiyah, even though the dichiyah isn't mentioned in the original pasuk. I guess Gemara just assumes. There's also some girsa problems here. You might have in your text one for smicha, one for dichiyah, which doesn't make any sense, and the Bach takes it out and says that's not the way to read it. Seems to be some girsa problem. It probably would have been enough to just say l'smicha, right? That one is for smicha. Amrulei Rabbanan Rav Ashi. Last part of the section. L'didach. Now they have a problem with him because what did he say? The word take out already means one camp, and then two outside the camp is the second. Well, now if we go back to our original drasha with the Parim and Israfim, all the psukim there said take out outside the camp. So now we have a problem because we darshaned each one of those psukim is only one taking out of the camp. We didn't say take out is one and outside the camp is two. So Ledidach, Kol Hane, Rule Rabbanan Rav Ashi, the rabbi said to Rav Ashi, Ledidach, according to you, Kol Hane Hotzi, Dechtive B'Parim and Israfim, my Darashbe, what did you do with all those? How are you going to darshan those words? They're totally unnecessary. Kashya. And Gemara ends with, we have a difficulty with Rav Ashi's commentary. Okay, now we're going to get back to a really interesting issue that comes up. It doesn't appear in the Mishnah really, but the Mishnah described, and maybe you already kind of sensed, that we need a whole entourage of people here for this person. And we need the person who's holding the thing. We need the person who's on the horse. We need a horse. We need all sorts of things. We need implements to kill the person with. We need the tree. We need the wood. It's a whole thing. So Rav Huna says, no, Rav Huna, the question is who pays for all this? Fascinating question, right? You don't always think that Gemara is going to ask this question, but it's a really practical question. Who pays for everything? So Amar Rav Huna pshitali, it's obvious to me. Echad even sheniskalba, the stones you use for stoning. Echad et shenitzlebo, the wood you use for hanging. Echad saif shenei ragbo, if it's killing with a sword, the sword. If it's echad sudar shenichnakbo, it's the thing they would use to strangle people. Kula mishel tzibur. That obviously is going to be from public funds. My time. Well, why is that? Well, we're not going to say, listen, in order to kill you, we need you to spend money on this. Now, theoretically, you could say that because it's like someone, when someone sues someone else and then you say, well, you have to pay my legal expenses. It's all your fault. I had to do this, right? Theoretically, it is this person's fault that we have to, the public fund is going to pay for this. But yes, it does make sense that we're not going to demand from this person to pay for all the implements used to kill. However, what about all the implements used to help the person, right? Like the person who's holding this sudar, right? That waving that red flag, and the person on the horse and the horse itself. Those are all to save the person. Is that our responsibility? The community's responsibility? By Rav Huna, it's very interesting because we're talking here about communal responsibility. We're going to end our sugya in a totally different place, but also about communal responsibility. And I think it's a very central idea in this Masechet in general. The whole idea of Kol Yisrael Arvim Zebazeh, its sources in our Masechet, makes sense in the context of the court and setting up the society in a just way. It makes sense that would be a part. So they ask. So now he says, "Bye, Rav Huna." But here's my question: Sudar sheminifimbo v'sus sheratzu mamidan. Okay, what about that piece of cloth they're holding, or the horse, or what I think he means is also the people that we have to pay to be doing all this work. Mishal mihu, who pays for that? Do we say kevan da'atzavadide mididehu? This is all to save the person, so the person has to pay for the expenses to be saved. Oh, Dilma, kevan debeidina mechayvina lemea babahatzala mididhu. Maybe you would say, since the court is commanded to try to save this person. Now, again, not commanded in the Torah, but the rabbis viewed it as their responsibility, then maybe mididhu from them should be, not them personally, it should be, right, the communal funding. Vitu, and furthermore, here's the second question. Had Amar Rabbi Chia bar Rav Ashi, okay, Rabbi Chia, the son of Rav Ashi, Amar Rav Chisda, son of Rav Chisda, Hayotze lehareg, mashkino to koret shelivona bekos shel yain kedei shetitaref da'ato. So now they say, the person, before they go out to kill them, they give them some frankincense mixed with wine in order to calm them down. Okay, like a sedative. We want to calm them. Why do we want to calm them? Give wine to someone who's about to be killed, or someone who's lost, who's going to die. And wine to those who are suffering. Okay, it's a commandment to basically help calm people. We want to calm them down before they die. Now, one of the reasons they give is that we don't want them to fight for their life. We want them to die quickly, because otherwise we want them to suffer less, basically. We want to calm their suffering. Vitanya. Okay, so what's the question here? Well, it says in a Braita, Nashim Yekarot. Okay, you could do a search where Nashim Yekarot come up in the Gemara. They come up in other places. Shabi Yerushalayim. Hayum Nadvot Umiviot Otan. They would generally, if there were these women, they would bring this. They would voluntarily bring it, so no one really had to pay for this stuff, for the wine and the frankincense. However, Loit Nadvu Nashim Yekarot. What if they didn't? Mishal mi. Then we still have the question: who's going to pay for that? So the Gemara answers about the last one. Ha vadai mistabra mishal tzibur. Okay, that obviously is mishal tzibur, even though you would think, right, there's no obligation, okay, but it does say in Mishnah you're supposed to do this, and in fact, they darshan, kevan dichtiv tnu, because it says in the pasuk, give wine to the one who's suffering, right? So give is a commandment to who? To the community. The community is responsible for this as well, miditu, and therefore they have to pay the money. Now, they never answer the other question about the horse and all that. Some people think that obviously if you're paying the money for the wine and the frankincense, then obviously you're going to pay for the other part, because that's a commandment on the court to do that, and therefore it would be a public need. But some people say it's still left unanswered, and then we don't know. Rav Acha bar Huna Rav Sheshet. Amar Chamina Talmidim yesh lelamed alav zchut v'nishtatek mahu. Comes Rav Acha bar Huna, asks Rav Sheshet the following question. Says, listen, if a student comes forward and says, I have a way to acquit this person, and then immediately becomes lame and can't speak, and now we don't know. Now, can you kill this person? It's a great question, right? Because we're trying so hard to save them. Now we know that someone has something to say, but we've never checked what they had to say. They never said it. So do we accept it? Do we not accept it? Do we say, we're not going to kill this person because maybe someone has something to say, even though they can't say it anymore? Minapech Rav Sheshet biyadei. He kind of puts his, makes a gesture like, give me a break. That's not a question. Nishtatek afilu acha b'sof ha'olam nami. So if you're worried that maybe this person had something to say and maybe we shouldn't kill the person, it could be, in any case, maybe there's someone on the other side of the world that has something to say and we just don't know. If you're going to accept nothing, then you should accept nothing, which could, we have no idea. And you'll never kill anybody. So Rav Sheshet doesn't accept this question, but Rav Acha doesn't like the fact that he says this, because he says to him back, Hatam lo ka'amal. But someone on the other side of the world didn't come forward and say, I know something, or send a letter. In other words, we don't have to worry about maybe there's someone out there. But hacha ka'amal. But here the person said, I have something to say. So maybe we really should. So Rav Acha is not satisfied with the answer. The Gemara tries to bring another answer. And again, Rav Acha is not going to be satisfied. Tashma, the Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, Achad min haTalmidim shezikav hamet. We learned this already. If one of the students had said, I think this person's innocent, and then died before they voted, we count that vote as yes, okay, as acquit. Zikain lo zikalo. Now they want to infer the following. This says only if the person zika and said the person should be acquitted. But in our case, they didn't. It was less than that, right? So it sounds like we can infer only if really zika. In our case, he wanted to, but he didn't, and therefore it wouldn't count. To which Rav Acha answers again, zika pshitale, amar tibailach. I understand that zika. Zika, it's obvious. Once you said, I think this person should be acquitted, so we assume you didn't change your mind about that. But Amal, but I'm still wondering about this Amar case. And some of the commentaries say that what he means is, I don't buy your inference, because when you infer something, you infer this and not something else. Okay, that's a classic inference. But why would we infer a case that's so rare? How often would it be that somebody says, I have something to say, and then all of a sudden becomes mute? It's such a rare case that you can't say we're inferring from Zika to exclude this case, because this case is not a case worth excluding because it's so uncommon. And therefore, I don't buy your inference, and therefore I still have my question. So we're left without an answer to this question. Continuing on, the Mishnah had said, if the person comes forward and says, Yesh li lamed al atzmi zchut, I have something to say to acquit myself, we bring him back to court even 4 or 5 times, as long as there's substance to what he's saying. Okay, that sounds like a simple reading. Every single time he wants to come back, right? We check first to see if there's mamash b'dvarav. Now, there's 2 questions about this. The first question is, this contradicts the Tosefta. Afilu b'pam rishona v'shniya, even the first and second time we check to see if there's substance to what he's saying. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita, pam rishona v'shniya, ben sheyesh mamash b'dvarav, ben she'en mamash b'dvarav, machzirin oto. The first and second time we return him no matter what. We don't check to see if there's substance to his claim. We return him immediately. So, mikava elach, only after the second time, from the third time, im yesh mamash b'dvarav, machzirin oto, ein mamash b'dvarav, ein machzirin oto. Only after starting from the third time do we check his claim, and only if it's substantiated, we bring him back. Sounds a lot like the boy who cried wolf, right? The first and second time they believed him, but the third time they didn't believe him anymore. Okay? But the question is, that's not what it says in our Mishnah. So Amar Rav Papa, Tirguma mipam shniya ve'elach. So basically, Rav Papa says, our Mishnah must be the same as the Tosefta rereads our Mishnah and says, when it says, Ubavash yesh mamash b'dvarav, that's only starting from the third time. He says pam shniya, but what he means after the second time. Okay? And then we can match our Mishnah to the Tosefta. Now the question is, minna yade. How do they know if there's substance? Because the court's not out there with him checking. Who's checking? To which Amar Abaye, de maslina lezuga de Rabbanan. They take a pair of rabbis and they have them accompany. Okay, if you thought it was a lot of people who have to work here, we now need 2 more rabbis to accompany him on the way, so that if he has some sort of claim to acquit himself or herself, we have to check the claim. Who's going to check it? These rabbis. Come up. By the way, I'm just going to remind you, there's 2 other cases where, or at least what I can remember, where there's 2 rabbis who, Yafeh Gita, like the Sota. Okay, in the Sota, they bring 2 rabbis to make sure they don't engage in relations while the husband's bringing the wife, because if he does, that basically cancels his Sota claim. And the second thing is, who remembers? Yafeh, Yom excellent. Okay, they do that to make sure when the person's running to the refuge city for accidentally killing someone, that the relatives don't kill the person on the way. There's different interpretations of exactly what their purpose is. We'll get there when we get there in Makot, next Masechet. So stay tuned. So if there's some substance in Ilolo, so now they say, why don't they attach them from the beginning and check the first and second claim also, right? We didn't really explain why the first and second time we don't check the claim. So now they say, well, in the beginning, he's a little in a state of shock. and he might not make a very clear claim. So they might check the claim, and it won't be substantiated, but maybe there is substance to it. He just hasn't expressed himself clearly because he just walked out of court. He's about to be killed. So we're worried that at that moment he might be a little bit crazy and not be thinking clear-headed. Once already this has happened 2 times, and we bring him back to the court, it's probably calmed down at that point. There's a debate about when exactly they give him the wine, because if they gave him the wine, he's already somewhat sedated and not speaking so clearly. Some people think they only give it to him later. Anyway, okay, moving on. Matz'ulo schut ptaruhu. Now we get back to our case. So we're leaving the debate, we're leaving the Beit Din, going to the Beit Askila. We leave open the option if someone has something to say to acquit. So if they find that the reason to acquit is correct, patruhu, they let him go. Imlav, if not, we go back to where we were. Yotzei lisakel, he goes to get stoned. But we're still not up to the stoning. Now, charuz yotzei lefanav. Now they make an announcement, and this is whether there was schut, whether no one even suggested schut. We're back to the regular routine. We got a little off that they leave open this room for someone to say, "I want to acquit." But even if no one even suggests anything, at this point we make a big announcement. What's the announcement? Ish ploni ben ploni yotzei lisakel hasharavar avera plonit. Okay, they now make a big announcement. This person is getting killed for this and this reason. This is another change, by the way, from the Torah, because in the Torah, they want to make a big public thing of the killing. But pay close attention to what they want to make a big public showing of here, not the killing. They want to say this person's going to be stoned, al sha'avar ve'ra ploni, because he did the following sin, and you think that's where they're going, but no. Ploni, Dav, these are the 2 people who testified against him. And anyone who knows any reason to acquit this person, come forward now. Why are they saying who the witnesses are? Well, you're going to see in the Gemara right now. You have to add more than that. You have to say these witnesses came and testified that on Sunday, February 1st, or, blah, blah, blah. Okay? All the details of exactly what happened, what hour it happened, because maybe someone knows something, not of that the person's not guilty, but that maybe the witnesses are liars because they were with the witnesses somewhere else. So you make this big announcement in order, again, to acquit. Okay, fascinating that we take this concept of, Kol Yisrael Yishma'u v'yirahu, as it says in the Torah, everyone will see and everyone will know that this person did a terrible sin. Really, they're turning it into, no, we want to make a public display actually to acquit, not to convict. So again, you see this change from the time of the Torah to the time of the rabbis. Okay, everybody ready? Be braced for the censored section that was taken out. Okay, so it says here, sounds like you do the charuz now. You make the big announcement now, not before. Now Rashi says, 40 40 days before. Where does this 40 days come from? Okay, if you don't have the text that was taken out by the censor, you would have no idea what Rashi's talking about. So what is this 40 days before? So now, if someone could stick it in the chat right now, we're going to read the censored text. Okay, if you have Sefaria, it's just in your Gemara. Okay, and you would see it, and you wouldn't even realize that this was taken out. As I mentioned earlier, the Koran always puts back the way it was before the censor. So comes the Gemara and asks the following question. Vahatanya, doesn't it say in a Braita? Okay, so the question was, we don't make the announcement earlier. Here's the Braita. Be'erev haPesach tila'uhu liyeshu hanotzri. You can immediately see why they took this out, because it says on Erev Pesach they hung Yeshu from Nazareth. Okay, which we assume is Jesus. Okay, it sounds pretty much like Jesus. Some people claim that Yeshu hanotzri in the Gemara is not necessarily Jesus, and in fact, you might remember in Sota also, we learned there was a story where Yeshu hanotzri came in. And historically, it didn't jive. Okay, the people he was with were not people from the same time, and basically, we're going to see. So most people think this is Jesus, and it could be those who claim it isn't. We're trying to kind of justify, but anyway, you can see why they took this out, because it basically says the Jews are responsible for Jesus' death. If you read Flashback, Shuli does a fabulous job of giving some of the historical perspective. About the issues, the fact that all this really came to a fore in the 1200s, because that's when the Jews started to have much more connection with the Christians, and the Christians realized that there was all this Torah Shabbal Peh that they hadn't really known about the Jews, and started to understand it better and realize that there were things in the text that they used. Before that, it was all these psukim, right? Oh, it says in your Torah this, and as we've been discussing, and we're going to see some more of those in a few minutes. But basically, then they burnt the Talmud, exactly, and it was all because of these statements, and that's when they censored the Gemara. So there's a lot more to be said about that, but not for today. So so it doesn't say in a Braita, Erev Pesach lehang Yeshu. And 40 days before they announced they're killing this person, and Yeshu anotzri yotzei lisakel al shekishef v'hisit v'hidiach et Yisrael. He did three things. He engaged in witchcraft. He turned the Jewish people away, and hidiach, mesid and hidiach is very similar. Like mesid is he got them to worship idols, and hidiach is basically he got them to turn away from God. And anyone who has something to say, any reason to acquit, should do it. And nobody did. So they hung him on Pesach. So our question is on Erev Pesach. So our question is, here you see they did it 40 days before. To which Amar Ula v'tizbara, what? That's your proof? How could that possibly be a proof? Yeshu anotzri bar fuches. Sorry. First, Ula asked the question. Wait a minute. How could that make any sense? Yeshu anotzri bar fuches chutu. Why would they forget about the 40 days and why the 40 days don't work by us? But why were they even trying to find schut for him? Because what do we know? He was a Mesi too. And what do we learn about a Mesi? Rahman Amar, lo tachmov lo tchasel. It's the one case in the Torah where you don't have to search for acquitting. And we already learned that, right? You don't struggle to try to acquit in that case. So why would they even try? Why would they even announce 40 days before? So now we're going to have an answer that both answers Ula's question and answers the Gemara's question all at one, because it says, Elashani Yeshu dikarov l'malchutav. He had good relations with the authorities, and therefore we did something that wasn't exactly within the law, but we had to try to find any way we could to acquit. And it also explains why we did it for 40 days. It was a total exception to the rule, which makes sense in the context, right? And therefore, that resolves our issue. But before we move back to our regular scheduled program, we're going to have another thing about these early Christians that the Jews wanted to kill, and they tried to bring proof that they were innocent, and we proved that they were not. But don't think that we're going to be talking about real claims of I'm innocent and guilty, or right? But we're going to bring psukim, and again, as we talked about the heretics, especially the early Christian heretics were very much based in the Old Testament, and brought all sorts of sources from the Old Testament to prove their points and twist the psukim to say what they wanted to say, or use psukim to say what they wanted to say. And the Jews always found other psukim to respond. At least that's what we're going to see. That's the agenda of the Gemara, to show that we always win out, right? That we had the proper claim. So Tanu Rabbanan, again, we're still in the text that was taken out. Hamishat Tamidim Ayulo the Yeshua 3 at 5 students, Matai, Nakai, Netzer, Uvuni, Vitoda. Okay, Atjua Lamatai, like Matthew. Okay, they brought him forward. Amar lehu mati yehareg. No way could you kill me, because look, there's a pasuk that says I can't die. Haktiv matai avo ve'ereh pnei Elohim. When will I come and see the face of God? But if you read it not as a question, it's meant to be a question. Matai avo. Matai will come and see the face of God. So you can't kill me. I'm obviously worthy of seeing the face of God. Amrulo in Mati yehareg. No, it's not true. Mati will die. Diktiv Matai yamut va'avad shmo. When will you die and your name will be wiped out? Meaning Mati will die. Okay. Achua lenakai. They bring nakai. Amar lahem nakai yehareg haktiv v'naki v'tzadik al tarov. Nakai is like naki, someone who's innocent, right? Innocent and a tzaddik should not be killed. Amrulo in nakai yehareg diktiv b'mistarim yeharog naki. In secret places, he kills the one who's innocent. Sometimes the innocent gets killed, okay? Even though he's called innocent, but sometimes maybe someone who's innocent deserves to die. Maybe they're not really innocent. Atjua lenetzer. Amar netzer yareg. Haktiv netzer mishor shav yifret. A branch will grow out of the roots here, meaning something great is going to come from me. Amrulo in netzer yareg. No, there's another pasuk. Dirtiv. Vata shlachta mikirbacha ke netzer nitav. You will come out of you're cast out of your grave like an abhorred branch. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this one is, and this one and the next one is, there's branches that are good, there's branches that are bad, right? It's like this idea that there's two sides to this. Okay, we're going to see this in the next two really. Here it's the most clear. Okay, like the real Christian reference here. B'ni b'chori Yisrael. B'ni, like Boni, is the firstborn of God. What do you mean? God kills the firstborn of the Egyptians. You're on the wrong side. You're calling yourself the chosen one, but you're really not the chosen one. Here you really see the whole idea here of what was going on then. Atiyah l'todah. Amar todah yehareg. Haktiv mizmor l'todah. Right? We sing praise to the todah. Amru lo in todah yehareg. Dechtiv zovech todah yechabdineni. Okay, whoever slaughters a todah honors God. So if we slaughter you, that is an honor to God. Okay, that's the end of the censored text. And it's clear. I mean, if you weren't convinced that this was taken out, first of all, it makes no sense that the Gemara was asking that question if not for that. And then there's no answer or response to the question. And the next thing we're going to see in our Gemara, if we move to Amud Bet now, is a drasha on that pasuk that we just ended with about the Todah, which would have no connection here whatsoever if it weren't for that text. Anyway, I obviously don't need to convince you that it was taken out. It's clear it was taken out. It's just surprising that a lot of the texts don't actually bring it back in to make the Gemara make sense. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, especially, Rashi points out this 40 days. Obviously, Rashi had that text. It's one of those things that, once it was taken out, a lot of they feel like it's traditional to keep it the way our fathers learned the Gemara. And if our fathers didn't have that text, then we shouldn't learn that text, right? But it's a little bit strange. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, kol hazovech et yitzro mitvadeh alav, ma'aleh alav, v'katuv ki'ilu kibdo lakadosh baruch hu b'shnei olamim, ha'olam hazeh v'ha'olam haba. Anyone who slaughters the yetzer and mitvadeh alav and confesses. So basically, there's this idea of slaughtering your evil inclination and then confessing. It's like you honor God in two worlds, this world and the next world. Where do we get that? From the pasuk we just quoted. Okay, yechabdinenu is weird. It should be yechabdenu. Why yechabdinenu? There's two nuns to say both worlds. So someone who's zoveach, slaughters, and todah, which is todeh here. Todah is a play on words of todeh, to confess. So you're zoveach, and your evil inclination, and you confess. Yechabdinenu. You're basically glorifying God in two worlds. But Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, furthermore, he says, Bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam, Adam makriv ola, schar ola biyado. When the temple was around, you would bring a burnt offering and you would get rewarded for that. Mincha, schar mincha biyado. You bring a meal offering, you get rewarded for that. Aval misha dato shvala, and it seems to be saying, because there's no real end to that first phrase, when the temple was around, this seems to be saying when there's no temple anymore, what's the way to really sacrifice? It's to lower yourself. It's as if you brought all the sacrifice. It's even greater than bringing a sacrifice in the time of the temple. Okay, so the zivchei Elohim, that means it's like the zivchei Elohim, someone who's ruach nishbara, someone with a broken spirit. Okay, this I just have to point out. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but this pasuk is from Yeshayahu, chapter 51. There's a bunch of chapters around there in Yeshayahu 51, which was all about the suffering servant, which they later said, right, the Christians claimed that was Jesus. And interestingly, they're bringing this pasuk here, trying to show, right, this idea of the suffering servant, really, but yet saying it's a Jewish idea, okay? And saying this isn't about Jesus, this is about us. And lo ela she'ein tefilatonim esed, his prayer will always be answered. Shene'amar lev nishbar v'nitke ruach Elohim lo lev nishbar v'nitke Elohim lo tivzeh. God will not ignore someone who has a broken heart and is low. So someone who puts himself low or puts herself low basically ends up, God will always hear their prayers. Okay, so that's the end of that section. And that was all about again, we got there on a tangent because we were talking about the cruise that they would announce to try to get this person exonerated. And then we basically got to the whole Jesus story. And from there, we got off on a tangent. Now getting back to our new Mishnah. So again, we're having these descriptive Mishnayot. We're really going along with this person about to be stoned. They're 10 cubits away, which is not very far, 5 to 6 meters away from the Beit HaSkila. Omrim lo, hitvadeh, confess. Shekain derech kol hamumatim mitvadim, shekol mitvadeh yesh lo chelek leolam haba. Okay, a bit of a reference to, well, 11th chapter in the Gemara. It's really the 10th chapter in the Mishnah. Perik chelek, who gets a place in the world to come. But basically, we're talking about this idea, and that's why this comes up here, which is all these mitot beitin atone for you and basically bring you into the world to come. So even though you sinned in this world and you got punished in this world, we're hoping this will clear you for the world to come. But you have to confess. If you don't confess, you're not going to make it into the world to come. Shekem matzinu ba'achan. And where do we know this from? Achan. Remember the story of Achan? There was Jericho. They surrounded the city, right? And then after they conquered Jericho, basically Achan took some from the Shalal. Nobody knew about it. In the next battle of the Eye, 36 people get killed. And then they realize something was wrong. Someone must have sinned. They do a whole lottery. It falls on Achan because nobody knew who it was. Remember this because we're going to have a problem with this later. But it seems like nobody knew who it was. And then they basically find out that Achan is the one. And then what happens? Yoshua says to Achan, B'ni simna kavod la'Hashem Elokei Yisrael v'tein lo todah. Give him thanks. But it doesn't really mean thanks. It means confess. Vayan Achan et Yoshua v'yomar. So what does Achan answer? Omna, which is like omnam. Yes, I did. Anochi chatati. He immediately admits that he sinned. V'chazot asiti. And like this I did. We're going to darshan this all later. Uminayin shekiper lo viduyo. How do we know that it actually worked? Because it's very nice. It shows the importance of confessing. But the Mishnah is saying you actually get atonement. By the way, we're still in the Mishnah. It's not exactly a typical Mishnah structure because it's more like questions and answers. How do we know that he was actually atoned for? Shneimar, Vayomer Yoshua ma'achar tani yarkacha Hashem bayom hazeh. Bayom hazeh ta'achor v'yeta'achor le'olam haba. Okay? What you were disgraced, right? God disgraced you, but this day you will be disgraced, but in the future you won't be, okay? That's how they darshan it, because it says, Bayom hazeh, on this day. Beyond today, since you admitted, you confessed, you won't be disgraced anymore. What if the person, okay, we're done with Achan, back to the Mishnah's continuing. What if the person doesn't know litvado? Maybe he doesn't remember what he did wrong. Emor, say the following words, Tehemi tati kaparal kol avonotai. My death should atone for all my sins. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Imaya Yodeh Shu Mezumam. What if you're about to be killed and you know that those Eidim were lying, but you couldn't prove it in court, and you know you're innocent? So what do? You can't say, I did this and that. Omer, Te'emi Tati Kapal, Kol Avonotai, Chutz Me'avon Zeh. This death should atone for all my sins, other than this sin, because I didn't do it. Amrulo, the rabbi said, that's crazy. You can't say that. Im ken you kol adam omrim, ken kedei lenakot atzman. Everybody would say this to make people think that they're innocent. So don't have the person who's really innocent say it, because then everyone will just say that so that they can appear to be innocent and go to their death, having everybody think that they're actually innocent. This, by the way, is a machlok at Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, which is a very common theme. It comes up in a lot of cases. One is in Yom Kippur, okay, where we're basically, I think it's with the wives, and he says you should always have another wife and another wife in place just in case, or with the wives or the something, and then or another Kohen Gadol just in case something happens to the Kohen Gadol. I forget exactly the context. And then one says, right, it's a Kohen Gadol, thanks. So and then they say basically, what do you mean? Ein ledavar sof. Like you have to have a basic, like you can't, this can go on forever. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan. So now the Braita starts off. We're going to darshan Achan, and that's what we're going to do for the next while. Na eina el lashon bakasha. So we said na, like please. It was a bakasha. So let's explain what happened. When God said the Jewish people sinned, Amar lefanav ribbono shalom mi chata. Yoshua said, who sinned? We actually saw part of this Gemara on Daf Yudah Aleph. V'chideli torani, Amar lo, v'chideli torani. God says, what, you think of a tattletailer? Lechapel goralo. Set up a goral and you'll figure it out. Meaning God didn't want to say it directly. He's willing to do it indirectly. Okay. Halach v'pil goralot. V'nafal goral al Achan. So he does a lottery, falls on Achan. Amar lo, now comes Achan. And Achan says to him, Yoshua, b'goral atabayilei? Well, this goral, who says this goral is correct? He says, for example, Atav Elazar Kohen Shnei Gdolei Adortim. You and Elazar, you're the biggest of our generation. If I were to do a goral, alechem goral, and I put you on there and you on there, right? Alechami kemunofel, the goral has to fall on one of you, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty. So the fact that it fell on me doesn't prove anything. Amar lo bevakasha mimcha. It's a great line. Al tusi laz ala goralot. Don't start publicly making fun of the goral and saying it's not true. Sha'atida Eretz Yisrael shetitchalek begoral. In the future, Israel will be distributed by goral. Shenemar ach begoral yechalek et haaretz. The Torah says it's going to be done by a goral, and if you start mocking it now, what's going to happen when I give out the land based on the goral? Everyone's going to be fighting over land, right? We know everybody loves to fight over land and property. So that's going to be a problem in the future. Why is this so relevant? And why is it in Sanhedrin? Because it's what Sanhedrin is all about. We're always worried about the kavod habeit din. If people start to say, oh, you made a mistake, oh, this, and it's something we keep seeing, here's another reference to it, people are going to mock the whole system and we're going to have a problem. Tain toda. So Amar Ravina, when he says confess, why did Achan confess so quickly? Amar Ravina shechudesh achti b'mileh. He bribed him with words. What does that mean? Well, he kind of tricked him. Klum nevakesh mincha ela hoda'ah. Sounds like he's saying all you need to do is confess. Tein lo toda v'pater. Just confess and you'll be exempt. Miyad vayan Achan et Yoshua, and that's why Achan immediately confesses because he thought it would exonerate him. Omna anochi chatati laHashem Elohei Yisrael v'chazot asiti. And he was basically bribed into doing it. Amar Rabbi Ashi, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Now we're going to darshan that pasuk. Milamed shema'al acham b'shlosha charamim. Now the fact that the pasuk says, I sinned and I did this and this. What's this and this? Must be he sinned twice before. And when did he do that? B'yimei Moshe. Shnayim b'yimei Moshe, echad b'yimei Yoshua. Shene'emar kazot asiti. That I did before. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Chamisha. It's 5. Why? Arba'a b'yimei Moshe, because it says v'chazot asiti, and the vav before each one adds another one. There were 4 times he sinned in the time of Moshe, and only 1 in the time of Yoshua. Shene'emar anochi chatati v'chazot asiti. Now the big question: Ad hacha my time lo ianush. Why until this point then were the people not punished for the sins of Achan? What happened? 36 people died. This is what you call kol Yisrael orivim zal zeh. Everyone's responsible for his sins, and that's why the Jewish people got punished. But why weren't they punished for all the things he did in the time of Moshe? We get to a fascinating sugya. Gefet this week is on it. Hopefully the English will go up today. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon lefisha lo anash ala nistarot ad shavru Yisrael et hayarden. This was something that was done in secret. Nobody knew about it. Kol Yisrael orivim zeh bazeh, already in the desert. That's for known sins. But for hidden sins, that only when they got into the land. Okay. What Rabbi Niel raises is a fascinating question, which is, how can we be responsible for sins we don't even know about that other people do, right? And actually, we're going to see a machloka tanaim about this. Kittanai, and it's based on these dots on letters in the Torah. Okay, if you want to understand more about it, listen to Rabbi Niel's Shiur. Hanisarot Hashem Elokeinu lanu ulevanenu ad olam. Okay, it's a pasuk that has dots on lanu ulevanenu and on the ayin. She also explains why on the ayin, which is also a question. It's a little bit strange why on only one letter there. Lama nakuda lanu levanenu v'al ayin shebe'ad milamed shelo anash al nistarot ad shavru Yisrael et hayarden divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This says the nistarot are for God. Only the things that are visible are for everybody else, forever. But why are the dots on it? To say it's not really true. That the nistarot are la Hashem and the niglot to people before they got into the land. Once they got into the land, we're also responsible for each other, even for sins that are in secret. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Amar lo Rabbi Nechemia. No way. You can't punish people for sins that they don't even know about. Halok farne amar ad olam, and it says in the pasuk forever. It's taken literally. Ela kashem shelo anash al nistarot, kach lo anash al nashim shebegalui ad shavru Yisrael et hayarden. Before we got into the land, no one was responsible for anyone else's sins. And that's why Achan didn't, right? The people didn't get punished for Achan until they got into the land. The reason they got punished for Achan when they got into the land was because then people became responsible for things that they could have seen. But wait, it was all done in secret, no? His wife and his sons must have known. They saw what he brought home. Once they saw, it must be other people do, and then it's no longer in secret. Okay, and that we thought it was in secret, but it's really not. 2 very different approaches, very interesting approaches. Why this switch from the time they got into land and not? There's a lot to be said about this. You can listen to Rabbi Niel's Shiur, which really answers a lot of the complicated questions, but really they're complicated questions without perfect answers. Okay, so a lot in our daf, like I said, a chock full daf. Like I said, all the extra content this week is really on this daf and different issues. So we have We started off with the third interpretation as to how we got Michutz Lamachaneh. We got to who pays for all the implements. We dealt with what if someone says I have zchut and then becomes lame, which we didn't really have an answer. We fixed the Mishnah to match the Tosefta about the first two times, and we explained why the first two times are different that we don't have to check. Then we got to the whole thing of the announcement that goes out, and with that, we brought the announcement that went out for Yeshu, for Jesus, went out 40 days before. Why was that different? And from there, we got on to a whole bunch of Christian Jewish polemics. Then we get to the importance of confession, and that we learned from Achan. And from there, we got off on Achan and about communal responsibility. Again, like I told you, we were going to get started with communal responsibility earlier in the daf. We end with communal responsibility. It's a very big theme of our Masechet. And the question here is really, where's our communal responsibility, and what was the difference in the time of Moshe to the time of Yoshua? Which one switched, and what was the purpose of those dots on those words? So I know it's the end of the class. We had to rush through it, but there is extra material on our site to listen to fill in the gaps of what we didn't get to. Wishing, and like I said, also flashback all about the Jesus sugya and a lot of history there. So a lot of extra stuff to read. Anyway, a good daf and lots in there. Wishing everyone a good day and b'savot tovot.